Before I introduce our presenter, I'd just like to introduce the rest of the team. So my name is Amalsha. I work at the ADA and I'll be the host for today. But helping me, I've got Lauren Mayoma, as well as Brian Mandigora, who is our intern at the ADA. And then on to our presenters, we've got Mrs. Priscalia Khosa, who will be presenting today, and she'll soon to be Dr. Khosa. We're very proud of you and well done. I just wanted to say we will be doing the question and answer session at the end of the session around 1 o'clock. We'll be taking questions. Until then, Priscalia and Dr. Dominic Okoliko will be presenting for us. The recording will be posted on our YouTube channel. You can visit our website. We have a page called Webinar Wednesdays where you can access all our webinar videos, and this one will also be posted there. Without further ado, let me introduce our presenter. So Priscalia Khosa is a lecturer in the Department of Social Work at Stellenbosch University. She published widely on her fields of research interests, which include social work supervision, social work education, substance abuse, and gender dynamics. She supervises master's students' research on gender-based violence, school social work, and medical social work, among others. In 2019, she was awarded a Social Work Emerging Educator of the Year Award by the Association of South African Social Work Education Institutions. She also received an Emerging Scholar Award for the 16th International Conference on Interdisciplinary Social Sciences. So today, Priscalia will be providing a practical demonstration of how she utilized ATLAS.ti to analyze qualitative data from her PhD research interviews. Priscalia, thank you so much for joining us today, and we really look forward to your presentation. Without further ado, please do take us through.
Thank you, Amalsha, for that introduction, and greetings to all the attendees, I think in most parts of South Africa, but also I think different parts of the African continent. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I will share my slides. So because I'll be talking through my slides now. Amalsha, is it visible? Okay, awesome. So I think as introduced, so I'm Priscalia Khosa, and the title of my presentation this afternoon is really to reflect on how I used ATLAS.ti for data analysis and what I also consider as strengths and limitations of utilizing the software for qualitative data analysis. So I think just to indicate, I mean, from what Amalsha introduced, that speaks to my role in academia and obviously the research endeavors that I've had in my academic career. But also what I would like to make clear to the audience is that I'm not an expert of ATLAS.ti. So therefore, I will not in any way be presenting what ATLAS.ti is, what it does, and how to use the software or each tool of the software. And I think for the audience to get that introduction to ATLAS.ti, you will need, and I'll really encourage you to enroll for the summer school on introduction to ATLAS.ti, because then you have an opportunity. I think it is for the whole week. The last time I attended, we could attend for 3 to 4 days, wherein you are taken through all the process from introduction, what ATLAS.ti is, what it does, how to use it for different data sets, in terms of how you can analyze pictures, images, how you can analyze information from Facebook, from Twitter. But today I will be sharing with you my journey of how I utilize it in terms of coding and analyzing interviews from my PhD research. So I thought, let me indicate that to everyone. But what I am, though, is an expert on my own research, because I've been in my PhD journey for 3 years and some months. So I'm very well versed in terms of my research area and what I've done in terms of my PhD study. And also I am familiar and knowledgeable. I consider myself knowledgeable in terms of qualitative research, because part of my academic as part of my academic career and the articles or the research that I've conducted has been predominantly qualitative in nature. So though I would not be in this session presenting the whole process of qualitative research, I will give a brief overview, because that sort of links and directs me to how I then followed the process of qualitative data analysis using ATLAS.ti. So that's why it's important that I mention that as well. And I think some of the audience for today, you might be expert perhaps in ATLAS.ti. Some of you might be novice, and some of you might have never used ATLAS.ti. But I do hope that today's webinar and session would assist you if you are considering using ATLAS.ti, so that when you do decide to use it in future, it is not something new. You have seen it before, and you sort of know what could be the strengths and limitations emanating from using this ATLAS.ti, which then brings me to the aim of the presentation. As I've said, is really to demonstrate how I utilize ATLAS.ti for my interviews in my PhD journey, and how the data was organized and analyzed with ATLAS.ti, and also to share my own experiences, the lessons that I've learned utilizing this software for qualitative data analysis, and also my own personal story and reflections of the whole process. And as I've indicated, I'm aware that, from the audience, some of you might not be from the social sciences, humanities, education, wherein you sort of use qualitative research often. Perhaps some of you might be from the physical sciences, from the engineering, wherein you are not acquainted or often do not rely on qualitative data. So qualitative research, the purpose of qualitative research is to gain an understanding of people's views, stories, and also to explore how people interpret their own social world. So we're interested in the stories that people tell. As qualitative researchers, we're interested in terms of interpreting those stories that the participants share with us, so that from those stories we can sort of produce new description, new knowledge emanating from the participants' words. If you're using interviews, that will be from what the participants have said to you. And if you are using images, pictures, it will be what the picture says to you, as if that is your mode of data collection. If you are using documents, what is the information within the document? So because of the nature of qualitative research, qualitative data analysis, which is QDA, then is a process of breaking down that large volume of data. You can imagine if you've had interviews with 28 participants, which was the case with my own research, and which the interview lasted for about an hour maximum. So you can imagine the kind of information that comes from those interviews. So with qualitative data analysis, it assists you then to break that large volumes of data into those smaller units, so that you can begin to make sense of what the data is suggesting in relation to your own research aim and objectives. So it also involves making connections. It involves making connections with the different elements that emanate from the data, and allows you as a researcher or an analyzer of the data to sort of provide new descriptions of what you think the data might mean based on what you have found from the data that was collected. And one way of analyzing is through thematic data analysis or thematic content analysis, which is a search of different or general statements about the relationships and patterns that emanate from the information that you have. So this is the data analysis approach that I utilized for my own PhD. And they are often in qualitative research, because how you identify the themes or the statements, the categories, as I've said, is through the process of coding, which is the initial step when you analyze your data. So you could do that through inductive coding or deductive coding, but often in qualitative research, as I've said, because we are interested in the stories that people tell. So often how you code your data and generate categories and themes will be emanating from what the participants have said. However, you can still also use deductive coding, wherein you begin with what theory suggests, what the literature suggests, and then from there you go then look for specific information or codes that then emanate from the data. So in my own study, I've used both inductive and deductive coding, especially because prior to me conducting the interviews, I did a thorough literature study, which also informed my interview guide and the kind of questions that I asked the participants. So you will see as I demonstrate and give examples of how I've utilized it. So I could go in and out between inductive and deductive coding, depending on what stage I am of the process of analysis. So these are the 6 steps of thematic data analysis. I think different scholars and authors, have different steps that they suggest. So I went with Brown and Fleck's steps, and I think from what I've read from different steps, it could be Creswell, it could be Barbie, or all other scholars who are prominent in terms of qualitative data. This seems to be the core of qualitative data analysis, this 6 steps. Hence, I went with the suggestion when I did my own data analysis. So the first step is familiarizing yourself with the data. And what that means is that you need to read through the transcripts over and over again. So if it's interviews, you need to go through transcripts over and over again. If you are using document analysis, it means you need to review those documents over and over again. If it's images, you need to look at those pictures several times before you can actually generate codes from that. So then that is followed by generating initial codes. What that means is that as you begin to familiarize yourself with the information that you have, you try to label. You begin to label the information that is from or the segments rather of the data that you have, based on what you think is interesting, based on what you think might be highlighted, based on what you think the participants are actually saying, or what you think the data is suggesting. So you go through that process thoroughly, and you start developing or generating those codes. And codes could be words, could be phrases, could be terms, could be concepts. What you think represent the data that you have found or are analyzing at that moment. So you can use different concepts or phrases which has meaning related to your own study. And then after that, you search for themes. So I like the analogy that is used by Brown and Fleck in the explanation of the difference between codes and themes. So what the authors are suggesting is that a code is sort of, it's a brick. So it's a one brick, and themes are a wall or a wall of bricks. So with a code represents one segment of the data, but then the themes is the grouping of those codes. So the groupings of those codes then speaks to the theme. I can give a simple example. If, for example, you've asked your participants to, you know, to say what are their favorite fruits and vegetables, for example. So, you know, somebody can say orange, apple, banana, grapes, whatever fruits, and then somebody can say strawberries, lettuce, whatever kind of fruits and vegetables they have. So those are their responses. So when you code, you can code, for example, all the responses by saying apple. Instead of writing an apple, you can go with A. So a simple A, which then means you'll be able to identify. So all the participants who have responded that their favorite fruit is apple, then you use A for all those. So when you now try to search for themes to say, okay, so with all these fruits, but what are the themes that are emanating from this? So you start with the grouping. So you can then start grouping perhaps citrus fruits as one sub-theme, and you could have perhaps green vegetables as one sub-theme. You could have tropical fruits as one sub-theme, but all those things fall within the theme of fruits, because this was the question that you have asked. So the themes are mainly associated with your research goal and objectives, and also what we have asked the participants, but the codes are those singular things that you think make sense and are interesting coming from your data. I hope my example makes sense. So the simplest example I could think of, which I think is relatable, regardless of what discipline you are at. So once you have done that, and then you review the themes, and this stage is particularly important because you need to establish whether the data that you have speaks to your theme, and whether the theme that you have identified relates to your research aim and objectives. So that's where you go through again, through the data, look at, for example, with interviews, really the quotations that you have cited, do they really match with the theme that you have selected? Then after, you begin to define and name the themes to say, okay, so now I've got orange, lemon, lime. So this then follow within the citrus fruits, for example. So then you name and define your themes in that way. Thereafter, then you produce the report. So this is where you present and analyze your data for your audience, your reviewers, whoever will be reading your research. So you might follow all those processes beautifully and thoroughly. However, if in your report, if in your empirical chapter or whatever chapter that you provide presenting findings, if it is not clear in terms of the process that you have followed, then it doesn't serve any purpose, because you might have followed the process excellently, but the report should also suggest such. So that last stage is particularly significant. So I know I've given you an example of, apples, vegetables, and fruits, but now I want to delve deeper into my own study, because I will be illustrating using my own research study. So the research goal was to get an understanding of the stories of social workers in a designated child protection organization regarding the implementation of the supervision framework. What I would like you to note from this research goal, because it will make sense as I start to explain the themes, the sub-themes, as well as the codes. So, you might not be from social work, from psychology, or any of the social savers professions, but I'd like you to note the following variables, because which were key when I coded my data and when I began the analysis process. So social workers, that is the main thing, because these were the participants. So I interviewed 20 social workers, which were frontline social workers, and I also interviewed 7 supervisors, which were managers of the social workers. And then I had a key informant, which was the manager of, the regional manager of the entire organization. So I used a case study research design. So then that was then my key informant. And so I used the different data sets, as you can see, for triangulation purposes. So what I'd like you to note is that we've got social workers, we've got supervisors and a manager as sources of data. And then we've got a child protection organization. A child protection organization is organizations that specialize in providing services to children in need of care and protection, as well as their families. So the last variable is a supervision framework, which is a guiding document in South Africa regarding supervision practices in different organizations. It could be public, it could be private, it could be non-government organizations, like the child protection organization that I focused on in my own study. So those are the key variables that will continue to come as I demonstrate how I've used ATLAS.ti. So I conducted telephone interviews, as I've said, with the social workers and the supervisors. And I utilized an interview guide, which had very much open-ended questions, which were informed by theory and literature, since I applied a deductive approach in my research process. So now we are going to focus on, I think that was just the background, so that you know when we now begin to speak about ATLAS.ti, the background of the whole study, and hopefully it will begin to make sense and the connections thereof. So this is the home page of ATLAS.ti. So for those who are, are familiar with ATLAS.ti, this is your home page when you open. And for those who are not familiar, so now you know how the page looks like. So it won't necessarily be new when you do decide to utilize ATLAS.ti. You'll say, but you've seen it before. So this is the home page. And on the home page, there are different tools. And I must say, I did not use all the tools. So I only used a selected few based on what I wanted to do with my data and what I thought would be useful in terms of analyzing and presenting my own findings from the study. So those are the different tools, and you can see already there that from the home page, you can see PhD data analysis. That's how I named the project. So you can name it whatever you want to name depending on what project it is. So it shows there that there are 28 documents on this folder or on this project, and there are 55 codes, there are 2 networks, there are 3 document groups, there are 14 document groups. So that already gives you a summary of what is within this project, and it also reveals, when the project was created and when last did I last edit or utilize the project or open the project rather. So that just gives you an overview. So the step 1 of qualitative data analysis or thematic context analysis in particular was the one of familiarizing myself with the data. But before I could do that, it means the interviews needed to be transcribed. And after transcribing, then I added the documents, uploaded the documents in ATLAS.ti. And you can see there that there were 28 transcripts, which speaks to the 20 social workers that I interviewed, 7 supervisors that I interviewed, as well as the manager. And below there in blue, you can see document groups. The document groups speaks to how I've grouped the different, my sources of data. So if I need supervisors, if I need transcripts for supervisors only, which are frontline social workers, this is where I go. So if I want to review the transcript of the national manager, this is where I go. If I want to review the transcript of supervisors who are managers of the social workers who are supervisors, this is where I need to go. So this why the pseudonyms, so there is not their real, there's not the real participants' names. So I used pseudonyms to identify the participants. So each transcript was then coded. So I went through each transcript, you know, as I've said, reading through several times so that I get a picture of what seems to come out of the transcript or the interview. So which then led me to the second step. So the second step then was the generating of initial codes. So the initial codes that I had were 55. So when I started going through each transcript, so then I began to generate codes, as I've said. So the codes developed at this stage, they were very broad and narrow, and very many as you can see. So I used phrases like the effects of the current pandemic, because then I knew what that means based on what the question that I've asked. I have a code goal of supervision. That means I asked them about the goal of supervision, and then I coded it as goal of supervision based on their responses. I've got a code, the PDP minus and PDP plus. So what that means is that the negative experience of PDP, which is a personal development plan, and a positive experience of personal development plan. So this will obviously be informed by what you find from your data, depending on the nature of your data, and what phrases, concepts, and words you think have meaning based on your own research study. So again, to say, I use inductive and deductive coding. For example, the effects of the current pandemic, because when I conducted the literature study, there was nothing associated with the current pandemic, but I had to ask a question related to that and how that influenced supervision when everyone was under lockdown and they couldn't see their clients, or they couldn't see each other face to face in terms of providing supervision. So that theme or code was generated from what the participants have said. But something like the goal of supervision, the goal of supervision is something which is already there in the literature. So I know I'm going to ask them about the goal of supervision, and also know what different scholars have said regarding the goal of supervision. So that I'm able to interpret and make sense of how the participants understood the goal of supervision within their organization versus what literature is suggesting the goal of supervision should be. So this is just a few examples. It's not all the codes that were generated in the first instance when I started now going through the transcript and trying to generate all the codes, or the codes which I felt, made sense in terms of meeting my research goal. So this is one example of a transcript. So this is a transcript on, which has been uploaded on ATLAS.ti, and this is the theme. So I think my highlight have somehow disappeared. It was supposed to highlight whether it's a sentence, whether it's a paragraph, whether it's multiple sentences wherein I'm highlighting that this information which Dora as a participant is saying speaks to SS duration individual. So that is the code that I've assigned to what that participant has said. However, it also important because, as I've said, the phrases, the words that you choose to use as codes must have a meaning, and you must be able to understand them. So it's also important to have a code definition. So if it's SS duration individual, I must be able to remember, okay, I'm speaking about supervision session duration for an individual. And then the second one, I'm speaking about supervision session duration for a group. So that is how I'm able to differentiate to say, okay, they were speaking about the duration of a supervision session within a group setting. They were speaking about the duration of a supervision session within an individual context. So those phrases then, or those sentences I've highlighted to and labeled it as the codes that you see in different colors. And then you can see that they seem to be, like, for example, the supervision contract and PDP, they are in this categorized in the same color. So that means that they follow within one theme. So in the next step, which is searching for themes, I was able to categorize the supervision contract and the personal development plan as falling within the theme of supervision process, for example, as the theme that was eventually identified based on the codes, which you see now as an example from Dora's interview. So I just wanted to show you an example of the different codes with the transcript itself. What you can also do when you are coding, it can happen that let's say, for example, I'm highlighting the first where they highlighted, where you can see green, where you can see the green, which is the response. So the black is the question, the green is the responses of the participants. So where you can see you might highlight the whole paragraph, you know, and then when you highlight the whole paragraph, it means you are interested in what the entire paragraph of what the participant is saying. So it might happen that from that you are speaking about individual supervision and a supervision contract. So that one paragraph can be linked with multiple codes. So it does not necessarily mean that if I've highlighted that paragraph for SS duration individual, it means that's it. So it might happen that I might find another to say this also speaks to a different code. I might call it again the frequency of, you know, in individual supervision, for example. So that is the other advantage of ATLAS.ti, to say one, you know, specific response can actually be related to different codes that you generate when you begin your data analysis. So the third step is the one of identifying or beginning to search for themes. So now you've got your codes, which I refer to them here as categories. And something to know, all this information you can generate from ATLAS.ti. So it assists you to collate all the information, and you can export as an Excel document, as a Word document. So you can export all that information and actually include that in your presentation of your methodology or your findings chapter, depending on the structure of your research, of course. So these were the initial codes. As I've said, those which were broad, you know, very, very much broad, very much, you know, there were multiple, there were many. So now I needed to try to narrow that, okay? So then I had to develop the code groups to say, okay, from the findings, or from what the participants are saying, they speak about the negative effects of COVID-19. They speak about the positive, the positives, the positive experience during the lockdown. But in my presentation, I can't have all that, the negative and the positive. I sort of need to group it. So it's all within the COVID-19 influence on supervision. So it's grouped as one supervision theme. And then you've got anti-discriminatory policy and anti-discriminatory practices related to supervision. Again, you can't then have each one discussed. It can actually follow within the same group. So those are the codes are the bricks. Remember the analogy that I provided are the bricks. So now they're making up the whole, they fall within the anti-discriminatory practices as a wall. And then we've got the different functions of supervision, which is educational, supportive, and administrative. So they all fall within, they made up the wall of the functions of supervision. So that's how I was able to develop themes based on the codes that I've already generated. Having said that, though, what was also important and tricky for me when I started my analysis is that I also needed to consider the supervision framework, taking me back to what is the goal of my research, because the goal of my research was to understand how this particular organization, social workers and supervisors within the organization, how are they implementing this supervision framework? So it means some of the themes had to be generated from the supervision framework to say, what does the supervision framework really says about what is required, what is expected from organizations when they practice supervision. So I had to look at that and compare it with the codes that are generated from what the participants have said, and try to merge the two to say, okay, based on what the participants have said, they've expressed their experiences on anti-discriminatory policy, anti-discriminatory practices related to supervision. But what does the supervision framework says about that? And the supervision framework then refers to the supervision policy of an organization, that the organizations need to have a supervision policy. So I needed to merge the two and begin to make sense to say what exactly is my data suggesting, and what can I name the theme to be. So that's how I started the search. And as I've said, it's important then to define the codes, and how I've defined really is just to add the research question, because then I remember, okay, what did I ask the participants? Okay, these were their responses. Perhaps you might decide you want to unpack it even a little, clearer or broader, depending on what will make sense to you and the reader of your research. So once you've got the code groups, which are the themes in this case, you begin the in-depth analysis, because now you've done selective coding. You're no longer going to focus on all the 55 codes. Now you only have selected themes that you are going to work with. So this is yet another example to say the code was DOS theories, which is the determinant of supervision. So I know in my head when I said DOS, okay, it's a determinant of supervision. And this way the quotations, the quotations from the different participants. So I know when I asked about theories in supervision, Dora spoke about the strength-based perspective. Levels also spoke about the strength perspective. Mendy spoke about the person-centered approach. Michelle spoke about the developmental theory. So then I know, okay, means I've got sufficient data coming from participants based on their responses to say, this theme is worth having, because I've got multiple voices from participants in response to the question that I've asked. So which then matches with my my coding. So you must then, when you review the codes, after having searched, you must review the codes. Does it really speak to what I've coded based on participants' voices or narratives? So step 5, then that's where you begin to define the themes. So from as you can see, when I started coding, so the initial coding was DOS theories. So it was way too broad. But when I defined it, it was then theories, perspectives, and model. It wasn't just broad as theory. So I defined it more clearly, because then I consulted my literature to say, okay, in terms of the determinants of what is this concept referred to? You know, can I remain with theories? I can't remain with theories only because the participants did not only speak about theories, they spoke about models, they spoke about perspective. So an inclusive theme will then be theories, perspectives, and models, which is more understandable than just having DOS theory as a code that I initially had in the first instance. So this the 5th stage, I think it's for me personally, it was a tricky one, because I had several codes, as you can see, 55, but sort of needed to now try to limit and make them fall within specific themes. And this is where now I needed to go back to my literature, even though I've done extensive literature, but I needed to now go to my literature and begin to make sense. What will make sense when I present my findings, when I present the interpretation of what I found. So I ended up then naming that theme theories, models, and perspective. So the other wonderful thing about ATLAS.ti is that you can use things like word cloud. You know, if you want to gauge how often people have spoken about something, so you can able to retrieve that information through a word cloud. And in this case, it was when I was analyzing that particular theme, wherein I used the word cloud. And what was clear is that the participants focused mainly on the strength-based perspective. And if you look at the quotations as well, you can see the participants spoke predominantly about the strength perspective. And it was evident also from the organization's supervision policy to say, this is the approach that they use when they conduct or facilitate supervision. So I had sufficient evidence to say, this is a worth having sub-theme, because I do have evidence which support the theme that I have selected. So from the theme, from the codes, from the 55 codes that I had in the beginning, I eventually in the last, so once I've done the review, once I've consulted the theory, I came now to a conclusion that I only need the major themes. Now, the wall that I'm talking about, it was 3 themes. So I ended up with 3 themes, and these 3 themes emerged from the literature through the deductive process of coding and analysis. And then from that, from those 3 themes, there were about 15 sub-themes. There were about 15 sub-themes, which were the determinants of supervision, which also emanated from the literature. But those determinants of supervision were also aligned with the supervision framework. Remember when I said one variable to consider and having to navigate between what the theory suggests, what the participants are saying, and the supervision framework. So that was one sub-theme or the relationship that I had to consider when I eventually had my final themes or sub-themes. And then the categories. So I no longer had the 55 codes, but then it was now condensed into those specific categories based on what the participants have presented. And this is how I've named it. So this is just one example of the theme from the data. So this is the data in the final presentation and analysis of my findings. So you can see the transition from the multiple codes that I had, having to review, revise several times until I came to this conclusion and began now presenting and making sense and interpreting what the data suggests. So, which is the last step, obviously, of generating the report. As I've said, ATLAS.ti use different networks. You can use word clouds to bring in, you know, that graphic visual way of presenting your data. Personally, I'm left-brained. I like words. I like speaking, you know, so ATLAS.ti presented an opportunity for me to visually present my data analysis and interpretation of what I've found. So the example that you see here on the screen is two sub-themes, the roles of the supervisor and the goal of supervision. When I was analyzing, I realized that there seems to be a relation, you know, a relation between, when I was asking about the goal of supervision, some of the responses were related to the roles when they were speaking about the roles of the supervisor. So I can already make that connection, you know, to say the roles are associated with the goal of supervision. This particular quotation, this what the participant has said relates to what the other one has said, or it supports, it explains, it expands. All this you can generate on ATLAS.ti, but obviously it must make sense to you. It must have that meaning and your interpretation of what you think the data is suggesting. So this is what an example of how visually I could produce that report and analyze and interpret the findings to make it more accessible and more clearer. So I think the last stage, you've now generated the report, but part of generating the report is obviously interpreting and presenting that in your final research report article, you know, in this case, in my case, obviously my dissertation. So because I employed a constructionist theoretical framework in my study, what was important was listening to the stories of the social workers, listening to the stories of the supervisors, obviously my own story as a researcher in terms of what I know, my expertise, and what I've read, and what the literature is also suggesting. And then from that, bring the story of the supervision story. So that's what was important, I think, for me to really use ATLAS.ti, because I realized, I mean, I've used manual data analysis, the highlighting, you know, all that, the pages, I've done that. But with this project, because I realized how massive it is and the data that I will have, the massive data that I will have. So I wanted to use a tool that will assist me in storing the data, that will assist me in organizing the data, making it accessible, but also be in a position to sort of make sense and interpret what the findings are suggesting. So based on all, you know, the entire process between our different stories and interpretations of what the findings were suggesting. So the categories that emerged, or the codes that emerged from the data analysis, were obviously interrogated, as I've given you an example of the theories, to say I had to figure out whether participants are only focusing on theories or they're broadly speaking about theories, models, and perspective. So I had to, you know, find out also from the literature, is the literature contradicting, agreeing, or is there a gap in terms of this? And the one thing that I also need to mention when you do your codes, because it's something that you are coding information that is interesting, that is a highlight, what you think it means, but also you can also code things which you think is not there. Let me go back to my example of fruits and vegetables. If you realize that the participants are focusing mainly on citrus fruits, you know, they're not mentioning anything about tropical fruits or green vegetables, whatever the case might be. You know, again, my example of fruits and vegetables. So you can then say, based on what the participants or the findings have you know, what you have found, it appears that the participants are not, you know, they don't love tropical fruits. Now you must figure out, then it means you need to go back to your literature to say, what is literature saying about tropical fruits? You know, what are the health benefits? What are the disadvantages from what the participants have said? Then you have identified a gap to say, even though tropical fruits have these benefits, based on what the literature suggests, your participants, your data didn't bring that up. So meaning that your participants didn't bring that up, already identifying a gap. And then you can make recommendations for future research to say in future, perhaps assist why people are not interested in tropical fruits, if you know, or whatever area of your research field is. So just bear with me in terms of the example that I can think of right now. So it assists, then that speaks to the literature again. So you can identify the gap from the literature as the question, but also from what the data you found, you can also see avenues of possible future research and recommend that. So in my research, then I've used a combination of the literature review as well as the empirical findings from the participants. That's why I was, you know, alternating between inductive and deductive coding throughout the process of analysis. So I think already I've highlighted really few things in terms of what I think is an advantage. For me, what I consider really the advantage and the strength of ATLAS.ti, very useful in terms of coding and managing data, because I've got all my transcripts there. So it also affords an opportunity to have a backup, because I know, okay, all my data is there on ATLAS.ti. I've got, you know, I can access the information there. You can store, you can organize. You've seen with the initial step of familiarizing how I've labeled the information, you know, and how each has been categorized in a very creative ways. You have seen an example of that network of the role of a supervisor and the goal of supervision. So it assists you in doing that for somebody like me who's really, you know, very lag in terms of creativity, especially when it comes to images. So ATLAS.ti was helpful in that regard. Again, it assists you to compare. So as you have seen, and I hope you also remember the initial process of the slides there, wherein of the slides, wherein is the groups. The groups of the documents, wherein I had supervisors in one group, I had supervisors in one group. So if I needed to compare the responses of the supervisors and the supervisors, it allows me to do that. However, that was not the purpose of my research. So I didn't have to really compare. It only came when I was doing my analysis, but the purpose was not really to compare their responses, but it can assist you to do that in a very systematic, way, and then draw conclusions from that. And also, research has shown that it does increase credibility and transparency of the analysis process, because I'm able to share this, I'm able to share with the reviewers, with the examiners, with whoever's going to read my research, to say, this is the process that I've followed. These were the challenges, obviously, along the way, but this is how I managed to navigate the process and come to a conclusion based on what my data suggested. So that is another advantage in terms of transparency. I think I'm running out of time, so this is my last slide, Amata. So it also enables you to use a code several times. So you can use a code several times. If you have the supervision goal with the first participant, with Dora, you can use supervision goal again in the next transcript with supervisee Priscalia, which is very different if you're going to use paper and pen and highlight, because you need to continuously highlight. If it's a goal, you need to highlight that, okay, this is the goal of supervision in yellow, in blue, in green, whatever color, if we are using manual, data analysis. So before I hand over, so I think for me, I did not really, really find any limitations, honestly. But I think these are the things for you, I think you need to consider and keep in mind should you choose or want to utilize ATLAS.ti, is that as much as it offers you an opportunity to focus and reflect on the process of analysis, ATLAS.ti does not do the work for you. So you still need to upload the documents, you still need to do the coding based on what you find interesting. You still need to make the connections. So the tools are there. It's up to you in terms of which tools are you going to use on the software to serve the purpose of your study and what you intend to do. So the critics of ATLAS.ti argue that the coding can be done quickly. And I do agree with that because within less than a month, I was complete with the coding of, the generating the codes. But also what the critics do not highlight, it doesn't stop there, because you still need to sit with the codes and then begin to generate the themes. So the themes which I was generating were not on ATLAS.ti, so I had to do that separately based on the codes that were emerging from ATLAS.ti. So as much as you can do the coding quickly, you still have a process of interpreting what the codes have said, what themes are saying, and then present that. Lastly, because there's a lot of numbers that happen on, ATLAS.ti, and obviously for somebody who's a qualitative researcher, it was quite tricky so that I don't sway towards quantitative. Now try to look at how many codes, in this transcript, and then, try to interpret that based on the number of codes that are there. So I think this is something, especially if you're in qualitative research, is something that one needs to be cognizant of, so that we are not swayed towards wanting to present the data in a more quantitative format than listening to the voices of the participants, even that one participant that might make sense, even though it might not be similar to what other participants have said. So I will pause here and allow Dominic to take us through the process of using ATLAS.ti for literature review, because I focused on data analysis, but we sort of want to give you a piece of what else you can do with ATLAS.ti. It won't only be data analysis. And perhaps in this, comments section, you can also indicate whether you agree with some of the strength that I found in my experience, and whether you've identified other limitations if you have used ATLAS.ti before. Thank you, Amasha.
Thanks, Priscalia. Thank you so much for the session so far. I would like to introduce Dominic Okoliko. He'll be presenting a short session quickly on using Atlas for the literature review. Dominic, are you there?
Yes, Amasha, and thank you. Thank you, Priscalia, for your presentation. And to all the colleagues, good afternoon from my side here. So I will go straight into the presentation because of time, and let me share my screen. And Amasha, can you confirm if you're able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
When you click on the share screen and the little arrow, does it allow you to choose your screen?
Yes, I've done that.
Okay, yeah, it says you have started screen sharing, but I'm not seeing anything yet. It's just black.
Okay. Let me stop it and start again.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Screen two. Sure.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So we want to talk about using ATLAS.ti for literature review. And in the first slide that I'm presenting, there is Brian Gassler. He's an astronomer from University of Toronto, and he has this to say, that research is spending 6 hours reading 35 papers so you can write one sentence containing 2 references. Wow. I don't know about you, but this resonates very well with me as far as my journey researching is concerned. Before you do any research, you've got a lot of articles and book chapters and books to go through. And most times it is daunting as a task. And perhaps this is why talking about literature review using ATLAS.ti is an important thing to do. So I am Dominic, and I'm with the School of Public Leadership, Stellenbosch University. Today, I want to share with you my experience using ATLAS.ti to do systematic literature review. And it is part of my own PhD. I just completed my PhD this year and would be graduating in December. So I look forward to it with excitement. So to start with, by the way, I'm a meme person, so I collect a lot of memes, and so you'll be seeing quite a number of them in this presentation. Think about this. Can't I just conduct research without doing a literature review? And if you have a mentor like mine, perhaps you might get responses like, well, yes, or a standing move, but it is sort of illegal. I mean, the reason is this. When you want to do a research, you would want to provide foundational knowledge about the topic you are interested in. And one of the things you might want to look out for would be to identify key researchers in the particular subject area, or to find out what ideas and theories are already in circulation in the knowledge system and controversies on the particular topic you are interested in. Or maybe you would want to know what methodologies and research techniques, tools are existing for the particular topic so that you don't reinvent the wheel. So, and the last of it would be, is there a gap you would want to contribute to? With this, literature review becomes very important. Another thing that might shock us would be sometimes when we go through our references or resources we have gathered, we might end up with this kind of statement, looking for that reference I swear I once saw. And you'll be scanning through your documents, either the one you have on your printed ones or the soft copies. And the reason is maybe you've not taken notes to put it down, and there is difficulty in retrieving what you thought you saw. So systematic review and ATLAS.ti can become a powerful way of doing research to help you do that particular retrieving when you're dealing with literature. So systematic literature review basically is about explicitly and systematically going through a particular research domain to identify, select, and appraise what is relevant for your particular topic. So if you have that in mind, systematic, methodical, then ATLAS.ti perhaps would help you because it gives an assurance of that systematic way of organizing your particular resources. And when you have organized and you have analyzed, it helps you to retrieve whatever you've done and helps you to query your data as well as your own analysis. And it can help you to report patterns that you've generated using very colorful and colorful visuals. So now, the particular paper that I'm sharing with is already a public paper published in African Journalism Studies with my supervisor, Professor Martin David. And the paper is titled Mediated Climate Change Communication in African Public Engagement, a systematic review of relevant literature. So having in mind what we talked about, there was a motivation for my usage of ATLAS.ti for the particular study. We were interested in understanding the forms of discursiveness that shapes climate change action in Africa. And for us, we wanted to see what sort of knowledge exists for the African context. So there were relevant reviews existing already, like the one by Agin Carson and Comfort and Park and the rest. But the focus on the global scale. And one thing they found was there is not enough attention to non-Western world, including Africa. And little is actually known about how much of this positive research exists for African context. So we wanted to provide evidence for that. And for that reason, we were specific about our question, which is one thing you need to be clear when you're doing a systematic literature review. We were interested in systematically reviewing and describing extent of growth and diversity, theoretical and analytical commitments that exist as far as research that focuses on climate change communication in the media in Africa is concerned. So two questions were of interest to us. The first was, to what extent is there growth and diversity in the mediated climate change communication research field within the African context? And what theoretical assumptions are found in the field? And do they have African epistemic attributes? So before I take you into the ATLAS.ti and show you very briefly what I did, we were particular about empirical research and not reviews and conceptual papers. And we source materials from, from web catalogs. So from web catalogs, and after going through all the processes that I described in the figure you see to your left, we ended up with 34 of studies that we included in our qualitative synthesis and not a meta-synthesis. The difference between the two is that with meta-synthesis, you are looking for particular data, especially quantitative data, and you collect it across studies to make sense of it for your review. But for qualitative synthesis, you are looking at different aspects. It could be theories, it could be bibliometric analysis, and all of that. So we were particular about qualitative synthesis. And before I share my result, then I would end this briefly and take you to the ATLAS.ti to share with you my journey with it. So usually with ATLAS.ti, you would need to start, if you want to do a systematic review, you would have collected your resources and you would have had it in any of the, any of the reference managers. For me, I use Mendeley. So I collected my data, had it in Mendeley, and had it exported in XML file. So ATLAS.ti supports quite a number of file formats, but for Reference Manager, if you need to import Reference Manager, you will need to export your reference using the XML file. I take it that you are able to see my second screen. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Thank you. So you basically export your file from Mendeley. My system is a little bit slow. And you save it as an XML. This particular stage is important, and that's why I want to take it through, because it quickly helps you to organize your data very quickly in ATLAS.ti. You save it in EndNote XML, and you save it. Then you go and open your ATLAS.ti. Are you seeing my ATLAS.ti page?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think you might have to just change the screen you're sharing.
Yes, I'll do that now. Thank you. My system is taking some time to get through.
Dominic, are you still there? I think that's okay. While we wait for Dominic, we can perhaps go on to the questions that we have. Priscalia, are you able to come on and answer a few questions we have?
Yeah, I've actually seen two
Okay.
questions on the chat.
Okay, great. Do you want to start with those, or
sorry?
do you want to start with those?
Yeah. I think
Please
I will
go ahead.
start with those. So the first one was regarding the subjective nature of thematic data analysis, and whether that is, is not a limitation and makes it, uncomparable, or lack of comparing it with other methods of data analysis. I do agree with that, that it is indeed a limitation. And I think this also speaks to the subjective nature of qualitative research, because as a researcher, your interpretation, it's also subjective based on what you know. So that's why it's always important to provide reflexivity, as a researcher in qualitative research, because you sort of center yourself around as a researcher to say, okay, this is where I am, these are my views, but they're also informed by what the participants have suggested, and also what literature is suggesting. So, and I think interestingly, I've also noted that actually in my dissertation as one of the limitations of the research. So you've got a point there. Yeah, so I think also maybe to address that is important that in your section of data verification and trustworthiness, you explain clearly which process you follow. For example, if it's a case study, I had to present this is the case study, and therefore the findings are within this context. and therefore do not expect any generalization. However, the data can be transferred. So if another organization, a child protection organization, whether in South Africa or in another context, if they look at the case study and look at the different themes and the process that I've followed in, conducting the interviews and analyzing, they can decide, okay, this can actually work or not. So I think explaining the methodology clearly can also assist. So the second question was, what are the advantages of thematic data analysis when compared to other methods of data analysis, such as interview, I think other methods. So I've often used thematic data analysis, so I know it works for me. But my understanding is that it depends on the nature of your research question. What do you want to find out? So if it's a narrative study, for example, if you're doing an autoethnography, ethnography, that means you might perhaps be interested into the content and the language used. Then you can use discourse analysis or content. So you are interested in what words the people are using. So it might not necessarily be themes in terms of the patterns, but we are interested in the words which the people are or the participants are using. So that will be for discourse analysis and also for ethnography. That's how I understand the different methods of data analysis. Yeah.
Thanks, Priscalia. We have another question from Eric Torney. He asks, which mistakes will you advise we avoid while using the ATLAS.ti for data analysis?
Which mistakes? Now can I think back? Yeah, I think I struggled a bit with when I began the what do you call now, the networks. So with the networks, because I wanted to bring the visual, kind of a thing, but trying to make sense of the networks. I think that for me was a bit of a struggle. So luckily, and I do need to acknowledge Tikwiza, because when I attended the course back in 2019, it was ATLAS.ti 8. So there were some new developments. So luckily she was part of the course. So she sort of said, Priscalia, this is how you can actually do it. So that refresher reminder to say, this is how you do it. So that was very helpful. So, but once you're familiar with the software, when you see it again, when you are reminded, it will begin to make sense. Yeah.
There's another question from Tiwo. He asks, if one is using deductive approaches, will they need to go through developing initial code?
Yeah. Yes. So it depends how you want, because there is a tool which allows you, if you've got a list, so it says listing code. I think I'm not sure the concept, but it gives you an opportunity to say you can actually list the codes that you've already have deductively. But in my case, because I was familiar with my literature, I didn't have to insert the list. I could already use concepts and phrases from my literature, not necessarily that which were emanating from the data itself. So there is that tool that you can use on ATLAS.ti.
Wonderful, thank you. And then I think the last question, it's just about actually how to get the software. Can you just give us an idea of where people can download it, how that works?
Yeah, good question. Perhaps that is one limitation which I found. So initially I wanted to buy it, for myself, because I did, thanks to NRF. So I got to find it. I don't know, I'll buy it, then I can keep it. But then I realized it is way too expensive. So if you buy a personal one, it's expensive. So there were several emails back and forth with the IT until they directed me to my faculty. So I think it will help if you go to your own faculty. So I'm using the university's campus-wide license, and I was given access by faculty IT. So I think people can use their own, faculty IT. People get that person, they will direct you what you need to do.
Exactly. So if you're at Stellenbosch University, you can go to your department and request, and there's a chance that you can get it through there. Otherwise, if you're not part of Stellenbosch, you can also check with your specific university if they might do that. But otherwise, the only way is to go on to Google, find Atlas, download it. They do have special discounted licenses for students as well. But it is a paid product. There isn't any free version, right, Priscalia?
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions, but I want to just quickly check if Dominic wants to finish his presentation and then we can wrap up.
I see there is a hand from Fanwa.
Let's see.
Or maybe it's wrong on my screen.
I do see it. Let me just ask him to unmute. Fanuel, can you please unmute and then maybe you can ask your question if you have one?
Thank you so much. I want to really appreciate Priscalia. This was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. The only question I have, is it possible, are you sharing with us the presentation?
I can actually answer that. So we have recorded this session, so it's going to be uploaded on YouTube, but Priscalia won't be sharing her presentation specifically. So you can go watch the YouTube video and everything will be on there.
Okay, number two, I'm a student with UJ and I'm mostly based in South Africa. I'm going into my third year now. I wanted to find, is it easy to contact Priscalia and Dominic?
If they are willing to, then yes, that should be fine. Dominic, Priscalia, if you're willing to talk to Fanuel. Fanuel, you can maybe send me an email to ADA School and then I'll connect you.
Register summer school.
You're at the farmer school.
Oh, register for the summer school and then you all the expertise, maybe you might get our contacts there.
Yeah, so I'll put my email.
But you are based at Stellenbosch.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I've put my email in the chat, so you can email me if there's anything, please.
Oh, before you go, don't send it. Let me check. Is that one at the school at Sun?
Yes, that's my
Thank
email.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dominic, do you want to finish off?
Yes, Marsha. I'm just looking at time though. I think
just a quick recap.
Yeah. Let me perhaps complete what I wanted to show. At least maybe that could be the takeaway for people who would be interested in using ATLAS.ti for literature review. So I would quickly share my screen now, and hopefully we should not have any issue again. And if you can confirm if you are seeing my screen at the moment. Are you seeing ATLAS.ti?
Yes, seeing Atlas.
Great, thank you. So I have created a demo and I'm going to just upload what I exported earlier and do a very quick overview of what you could easily find beyond the other things that you might be introducing yourself when you go through your analysis. So the thing with ATLAS.ti is, from my experience,
we're having a bit of a system issue.
Yes. Wow, today is not
a good IT kind of day.
Nah, apparently not. Okay, are you able to see?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. All right. So this is basically what Priscalia was showing you earlier, the basic feature or the desktop for ATLAS.ti. In our case, we want to import literature from our reference manager that we earlier exported. You go to under import and you click on reference manager, and it will open a dialog box. I hope everyone is able to see it. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. Great. So to start with, perhaps you want to check out basic things like who are the big researchers in the particular topic you're interested in, and you want to see the range of publication type that you are working with and you are interested in the year. You select all of those. You are interested in the authors, including the co-authors, basically, so that you can see who are the frequent publishers in the particular subject. So you select things that are of interest to you here, and you quickly open and select the file that you saved. And you have it open and you import. So we'll wait for it to show up, and I would quickly show you the basic analysis that has already taken place by default. So it is going to organize your document based on the files, the basic things that you selected. The type of publication, is it a book, is it an article, or is it a book chapter? And it would highlight for you, extract all the authors of your publications and quickly group them and rank them on frequency to tell you this person has published on this subject on so number of occasions. And it would also group your articles based on the number of years that they appeared. And with that already, you can begin to tell, okay, at what point did they take interest in the subject area, and begin to work with those information just before you start to answer your questions. So it's one thing that I found very useful with ATLAS.ti. So even that my system is failing me today, I would quickly go to wrap up the presentation itself.
Thank you, Dominic.
Yes, so when I did the particular analysis, I was interested in basic questions, and the interest was to see what growth trend exists for Africa. And the particular analysis I did, I generated a report and plotted it in ATLAS.ti, in Excel, which is a beautiful thing. You are able to export your information and work with it in other platforms like Excel. And you generate the kind of analysis or report visuals that you are interested in. For instance, which countries have been analyzed for the particular topic I was interested in. I was able to get that information by simply looking at literature and organizing it in ATLAS.ti. And the theories that have been utilized in the particular topic that I was interested in. And you can do interesting network of concepts and present it in your output. And just the last thing I wanted to leave with you, if we had gone through some of the basic things I wanted to show you in ATLAS.ti to entice you to perhaps register to do the course, and also by yourself read about it and work with it. Is you don't need to know it all. Like when I did this in 2019, I had very little knowledge of it. Was the first attempt at ADA, and I went to try it. So basically, if you have basic knowledge with it, you just give it a try, and you walk around it, and you get to get best out of it. The other thing is, automation is excellent, including when you work with ATLAS.ti, but it is only as much as you have done the work itself. So it will not do the work for you. even though I was going to show you, oh yeah. So basically, you've uploaded your file, and you want to see what sort of information has been already organized for you in the ATLAS.ti. You would I think we are above time, so
Yeah.
I'm afraid for today, I think it is much I'm able to do, and I apologize for the hiccups at my end. So hopefully you get something that interests you from my end. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominic, and no problem. It does throw a span in the works when things don't work out, and it's not great, but maybe we can find a solution to this. I'll speak to you after, and then we'll see what we can do. But besides that, from our side, from the ADA and from Priscalia and Dominic, thank you to all the delegates for joining us. I hope you guys learned a lot from this and had a good session with us. And then also a very, very big thank you to Priscalia and Dominic for presenting today and shedding some light for all the delegates who are present. I also saw in the chat that your supervisor was here, Priscalia. I think he's left now, but please tell him that we say thank you as well, and that we really enjoyed having him join us for the webinar. Prof. Engelbrecht, please do say thank you. And I see some of your colleagues are also here, so also welcome to them. Thank you for coming to support your colleagues. That's really, really nice. Great team you have there. And lastly, in the chat, I've put in a link for our summer school. So if you're interested in joining the Atlas workshop that we'll be hosting in January, please go take a look. If you have any questions, please email me at ADA School. The email address is also in the chat. But other than that, thank you so much to everybody. The YouTube video will be up on our website, and I'll also email it to everyone. There's just a quick hand from Prof. Howie. She's the director at the Africa Center for Scholarship. Just going to ask her to unmute.
My apologies, Amalsha. I didn't mean to have like a last word, but I was really fascinated with both presentations and just wanted to add my thanks to Priscalia and also to Dominic. And Dominic, I do hope that we can persuade you perhaps to give a full presentation that can be loaded on YouTube, because what you were doing was so important. And I really feel that it complemented beautifully what Priscalia had said. So I do hope we can twist your arm into doing that, but I know that Amalsha has a plan. So thank you. Just to say thank you so much to the two of you for really a very rich webinar. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.